Okay, we good? We're live, we're rolling. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the East Tennessee History Center. I'm Dr. Warren Doctor, the president of the East Tennessee Historical Society, so I'd like to welcome everybody in to come to our brown bag discussion today. This is really cool. We have a pretty full house for a brown bag. And I would just like to remind everybody, if you're not a member of the East Tennessee Historical Society, to please join. I'm contractually obligated to mention that. And just a few of the programs that we have coming up. The first is that on August 2nd, we have a genealogy workshop here at the center. And then on August 16th, we have our History Hootenanny, which we're very excited about, and which will be focused on sports history. So we're really excited about that. And then also on August 13th, we're going to have another baseball talk about the Oak Ridge Bombers. So that's also going to be a lot of fun. And I just want to thank our partners, the Knoxville County Public Library System, as well as Knoxville Community Media, who are here recording. So if everybody could silence their cell phones, I think we've had some people, we try to broadcast this live on Facebook, and sometimes phones kind of mess with the signal and that kind of thing. So we're trying to button up our tech stuff. So if you could silence your phones, that'd be great. I'm now going to turn over to our moderator, Adam Alfrey, who is a senior curator and who in many ways is the architect of Home Runs and Home Teams, who put together a fantastic research group who were able to create the incredible exhibition. If you've not been, has everyone been through the exhibition that's here? If you've not, I'd like to invite you after the talk to go through it because it is incredible. It's the first time anyone's done a history of baseball in Tennessee, so it's all original research. It's been a huge and fantastic exhibition, and we really hope to be able to even travel this around the state in the future. So without further ado, the architect of the exhibit, designer, literally the curator of the exhibit, but Adam Alfrey, thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see you here today. Get the opportunity to talk a little bit of history, talk a little bit of baseball. We really appreciate you being here and getting to meet some of the people that were behind this project. And before I go any further, I should also recognize some other folks that were involved in the project. So my colleague, Rebecca Piesheimer, my co-curator and co-conspirator on these projects. So really appreciate all of our efforts. And then Dean Novelli's with us. If you missed his talk a few weeks ago, you missed a really great lecture on the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, who's done amazing research on the Tennessee women who contributed to that league. And if you did miss that lecture, please look for it. It'll be posted soon. It's already up on the YouTube channel, so go back, listen to that. It'll be a good time. So today, it's my honor to introduce 4 individuals who had a role in developing the content for this exhibition. My role today is really as moderator, and if you know anything about historians, when you give one of them a mic, you're probably going to go over time. And when you give 4 of them a mic, we're definitely going to go over time today. So my job is to keep us on track, sort of on time, and hopefully leave enough time at the end to allow us to have some questions and conversation around baseball. I'm going to introduce these fine gentlemen in alphabetical order because both of my names start with an A, and I had to go through that my entire life. So we'll begin with Mark Aubrey. Mark is a local researcher and historian, and we really owe him a great deal of debt and gratitude for the work he's done to really pull together the source material that allows us to understand the trajectory of baseball here in Knoxville. He's got a couple of websites that he runs that if you love this stuff, please go visit him. One is oldknoxvillebaseball.blogspot.com, and the new one is bbsas.net. So I'll just go ahead and begin with our first question for Mark. What are your earliest memories of baseball, and how did you get into baseball research?
Thank you for having us. My first remembrance of baseball was going to Fenway Park in the late 60s with my dad and my brother. I don't know who they played. I don't know the date of the game. I don't know who won. But I vividly remember being at Fenway. Mid-70s, Montreal, the Pirates came for a doubleheader. Willie Stargell hit a home run. I don't want to say I was hooked then, but it was a solid sinking of the hook. I like sports, I like baseball, I like history, I like researching. They just sort of go together. So that's how I got into it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Our next individual on our panel is Dr. William Hardy. He's an assistant professor of history and the Lincoln Scholar in the history department at Lincoln Memorial University, if his tie did not give him away. Dr. Hardy, we owe a great debt of gratitude as well for really helping us understand the early teams here in Knoxville, the founding fathers of baseball. So, Dr. Hardy, a similar question. What are your early baseball memories? What got you interested in this topic?
My earliest memories of baseball as a young lad going to games with my father and my older brother. We lived in Louisville, Kentucky, so it was a AAA team for the St. Louis Cardinals. It was the Louisville Redbirds. And for me, it was more about getting the baseball helmet with ice cream in there. I was probably about 3 or 4 or 5 or so around that point. But my brother, in conjunction with this, why we were at the games, my brother was the one who was athletically inclined in the family and was a superstar baseball player in his youth before he decided to give it up. But those are my earliest memories. And how I got into the research is due to this gentleman over here on my left, Mr. Adam Alfrey, who is a founding father of bringing vintage baseball to Knoxville, having seen it played in 2012 or 2013 in Nashville. Started up the Knoxville, the Holston's Vintage Baseball Club in 2014, being a member of that. And so in doing so, getting to play the game, being a historian, knowing there was a huge glaring gap in historiography of baseball, especially in the South in the post-Civil War era. And so I eagerly jumped in and sort of my interests are 19th century. And so it goes hand in hand.
Thanks, William. Appreciate that. Next is Skip Nipper. We affectionately refer to him as the Dean of Baseball History in Nashville. He's an author, podcaster, blogger, and if you have not been onto his website, baseballinnashville.com, you are missing out. So Skip, how did you fall in love with this work?
Well, I found out through my mom's baby book she kept on me that I saw my first baseball game at 8 months old. I don't remember it. May the 6th, 1951, when I went to see my dad play, she took me to see that. But I remember seeing a game or two at Sulphurdale. Once again, don't remember who they played. I remember the unusual right field. But in 2002, my dad, who we worked together, we were flying back from a sales trip to Chicago, had been to Wrigley Field, both of our first trips. And he started talking about how much Wrigley Field reminded him of old Sulphurdale. And the internet was coming on, a Google search engine or something showed little or nothing. And so it inspired me to begin sulphurdale.com and continue research in that manner. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, we have Chris Ryland, who's the Curator of History of Medicine Collections and Archives at Vanderbilt University. With that title, you would think he's our team doctor, but he's not. He's our and also an active contributor to the early period of baseball, especially in Nashville. He has a article out this year in the newsletter, Origin of Baseball, for the Society of American Baseball Researchers about the early games in Nashville. And he was also an active contributor to the website protoball.org, especially for a lot of our Tennessee context. So, Chris, similar question. How did you get involved with baseball research?
Well, so my earliest memory of baseball was when I was about 5 years old. We lived in upstate New York, and my father was a big baseball fan. He still is, and his team was the Cleveland Indians. And we were in New York, but his team was Cleveland, and so the Yankees were not an option for me. So I had to pick my own team, and so at the time my favorite color was orange. And I was instantly attracted to the Baltimore Orioles because their colors, their bird mascot, cartoon mascot, and I also had a children's book on the ornithological bird, the Baltimore Orioles. So that became my team, and I just became obsessed. And for my 6th birthday, I asked for a Orioles uniform, and I got a Brooks Robinson T-shirt and a hat. And I've been a huge baseball fan ever since. And how I got into research, I was always interested in the history of baseball, the When I was about 11, I read a book called Glory of Their Times by Lawrence Ritter. I see some faces in the audience. It's a very popular book, and it's a book of oral histories about very early baseball from around 1900, and I just became just obsessed with these characters and these legends and the stories of sort of a time before time in baseball before it became became modern. And so I brought that sort of I had that sort of approach my whole life, and then when I started working with the Vintage Baseball League, I tried to sort of attach that to early Nashville baseball, and again, I just sort of started falling in love with sort of the legends and the people and the history and how things came to be.
Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing all those with us. So I'm going to pass the clicker over to Dr. Hardy. So for this next portion of our panelists, we're going to go sort of in chronological order in terms of the content that they're going to talk about. And the prompt that we gave each of them is to share a story from your research that everyone should know. So you're about to get 4 stories from across Tennessee baseball that you should keep in your memory bank for trivia or for other times when you just need something fun to talk about.
Well, here we go. Time, I got to keep this limited, and I'm going to do a few stories here. Let's see. Oh, broke it. Okay. So one of the things that when we play vintage baseball and we talk about the game, because that's one of the aspects of vintage baseball, is sharing the sport with the spectators, the fans who come out. And I'll dive into anything about 19th century history because I can go on and on forever. But we talk about the early games, and we talk about how these scores are like 90-50, and people's like, wow, they must have really been terrible at playing ball. And because they're watching us play 1864 ball. And one of the things about our vintage game is you can still get the out on the bound, one bounce, but we also play bare-handed ball. And the thing is the research that I've done when it came to Knoxville in 1867, that rule was gone. You had to now get the out on the fly or deliver the ball back to the base to get the runner out before they got there. And so these scores are high. But one thing you can look in sort of some of these scorecards that I have up on the screen is as the game develops, you see those high scores in the beginning, and with each game, you see them get better and better. The scores start to go down. And the Holstons, we have a pretty good track record of some of their games where they go from getting beat by 17 in their first game to the Knoxvilles, then by several months later, pounding the Knoxvilles 90-26, I believe. You see them with Mountain City. This is the Holston Club. You see them with Mountain City Club of Chattanooga. Mountain City comes up here in May of 1867. They want to play the best teams in Knoxville, and they thump the Holstons pretty bad. But come September, when it's the state tournament, the Holstons beat the Mountain City. When the best club in 1867, the Gate City Club of Atlanta, they're kind of like the forerunners, I say, of the Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869. When they come here to play a Thanksgiving match, this is the best undefeated team at the time. The Holstons only lose 3 runs, and it was in the 9th inning that they lost the game. It shows that they're getting better. And I remember when we started our vintage baseball season in 2014, we lost our first 5 games, and then it turned, and we started getting better. So I sort of see that analogy there. One of the things about early baseball is so much of our early history is missing. It's a strange phenomenon when it pops up in 1867. The newspapers start recording the games, but soon they drop a lot of the attention of these games. But what's interesting is you can get little bits from the newspapers, and you can find out that though these first teams were the elite, middle-class professionals, that quickly the game is democratized, that African Americans are playing it, children are playing it, and I suspect very soon women are playing. Maybe not here in Knoxville in 1867, but there's evidence of black teams, 3 black teams in 1867 formed just a month or 2 after the first baseball teams are. Young boys are causing havoc in the street, throwing ball, breaking glass. That one, the image on the far left is a city ordinance that had to be passed in June 7th, 1867, just a month after the first baseball games. And one of the great things about this panel is Mark, Aubrey, it must have been midnight, way past our bedtime, right? Maybe 1 a.m., shares me a message and says, look what I found in the 1950s or 40s newspapers and talking about this 1867 ordinance. I said, I'm going in the morning, I'm going to go to the archives and I'm going to find it in the minutes, and there it was. Ads, newspapers being sold, regulation baseballs, just in time for Christmas, 1867. It's just amazing how quick the game spreads. And I am really blowing through some stuff here, but I want to highlight this. This is an image, a very famous image in Knoxville. It's the first known photograph, and it's always been titled 1869. And that's because when it went into the archives, someone, and I believe it was Jim Thompson perhaps, inscribed 1869 on it. And so it's been published everywhere. It's the first known photograph of Knoxville at the street level. There's aerial views, I believe, in 1865 by Smiley. This is supposed to be a T.M. Swire photograph. And what's interesting about this photograph is there's so much evidence in here to test that is it 1869. And if you look in this photograph, there are signs. These are the first ball players. And they have their businesses established. And I'm able to look on the far right. You see Chamberlain Brothers. Well, I can look, and many people who've been around here, and I've only been here since 2004, will know the Chamberlain Albers drugstore. Well, Chamberlain Albers partners in February 1867. Well, this is Chamberlain Brothers. This is William Chamberlain and his brother Hiram. Their partnership would have been dissolved by that point. Okay, so that's earlier than 1869. I can look over on the far left and I can see Munson and Seymour. These are insurance agents, lawyers, federal claims agents. They went into partnership in August of 1866. So I can already put it right between that photograph using these baseball players through my research. And I can now confidently say, I believe that photograph was taken in the fall of 1866. Because if you look up in the center, there's a batch of trees. That is where the Farragut Hotel is, right catty corner from us. This was John Crozer's home, and you can see it there. And the baseball field they first played on was just the next block down, the 400 block of Gay Street. So through my research, I've been able to test this photograph and actually place this. And to me, it's cool because I can look here, and I like to tell myself there's some of those ball players sitting right there in that photograph right now. And I will take, because I don't know, I'm probably at 20 minutes now.
Oh, you're good.
I'm good. One more. Okay. 6 Degrees of Spencer Munson. This is one of the greatest stories. Spencer Munson, who was one of those, that was his business on the far left of that photograph. Insurance agent, a claims agent, a real estate. He comes here and he has an unfortunate accident in a ball game where I suspect a lot of these boys came out from their businesses and started playing ball. And they didn't do what we would do today, stretch and get ready. So he's playing the outfield, and as this report says there, the ball goes out to him. He goes to return and dislocates his arm. It's one of the more fascinating stories of early baseball that comes with the charming game and the injuries that are incurred. But one thing about him is through my research, I started looking at him. He was an officer from Ohio. He rubbed shoulders with 2 other officers in Ohio, a Rutherford B. Hayes and a William McKinley, 2 future presidents. And in the mid-1870s, after doing very well for himself, him and his wife, he married a Boyd in Blunt Mansion. They went back to Spencer Munson's home in Mentor, Ohio. Who was his next door neighbor? A congressman named James A. Garfield, who was just about to be on the Republican ticket for the presidency in 1880. Just a fascinating little story, and Mark and I can attest, sending Facebook messages at 1 and 2, and our wives wondering why we stay up so late, going down these fun rabbit holes of research, and all 4 of us, we love this stuff.
Thank you, William. You're good. All right, next up, Chris.
Okay, so I'm going to, wait, did I go the wrong way?
Did you send any photos?
I did. Oh, okay, no worries.
I'm sorry.
No, okay, no worries. So I'll talk about sort of the same era. It's Dr. Hardy here. One of the, I guess one of the ideas, assumptions we have about early baseball is that sort of field of dreams, that it was sort of a bucolic game and it arose from the cornfields, and and the baseball players just grew organically out of the soil to play baseball. And that really was not the case at all, especially here in Tennessee. And we have a lot of newspaper accounts. When you search for baseball in some of these old newspaper archives, you find people complaining that people weren't playing baseball. In the 1850s, around 1860, we have a lot of newspaper sort of editorials saying young people are lazy and they need to be playing baseball, and they need to be more athletic. They should be more like people of New England. The Southerners don't get any exercise, and of course there was this idea that physical exercise and intellectual ability were tied, which is not a new idea. And so whatever they tried, they couldn't get people to play baseball. And you do see a couple of references to a game here and there, or a club formed here and there, but nothing ever comes of it. And so this is one of the questions. There's a reference in the 1859, maybe 1860, to something called the Old Hickory Club, which played cricket, and they also were to play baseball. And there was reference to playing cricket in their cricket uniforms. And then nothing is ever heard of them again. And these are some of the questions that we ask. Well, whatever happened to these people who presumably paid good money for these uniforms? Did they end up playing and just didn't get into the newspapers? And this is, these are some of the problems that I have is there's not a whole lot of sources. And you look at old newspaper archives and sort of like, looking at shadows on a cave wall, and you're just kind of trying to figure out what you're seeing. Is it what you think you're seeing? But everything changed after the Civil War, when the Northerners came to Nashville and other cities as well, and started forming baseball clubs. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, and this is not just in Nashville and Tennessee, this is all over the country, everyone started to just get the baseball fever, the baseball mania. There's just a proliferation of clubs, dozens of clubs over a couple of years. And a couple of interesting things that we see is how it becomes quickly tied to sort of being a gentleman. We have one of the founders of the Rock City Club, a man named William Metcalf, and who was a he was a captain in the U.S. Army, and he came and he was also a newspaper man, and he was a member of the Rock City Club, which is the very first documented club in Nashville. And presumably he was the author of this newspaper article saying, be gentlemen, even if you are defeated 1,000 times. Apparently somebody got mad at the umpire, was a sore loser. And so there's this idea that playing baseball is a mark of male identity. And Doc talked about female clubs, women's baseball clubs. And there is a newspaper article, I don't know how accurate it is, but where some of these articles are wonderful. There's the story about a young man who hears he's in Nashville. There's a mansion, a walled mansion in one of the more fashionable areas of town. He hears some noises, and he looks to see what's going on. He climbs the tree and looks over the wall, and he sees a group of women playing baseball. This is 1868, and they've got uniforms. Their belts say FBBC for Female Baseball Club, and they're using baseball terms like, wasn't that a sock dodger? Which sock dodger was baseball lingo for a hard hit ball. And so they're watching these women play baseball, and he invites his friend to come and watch them play baseball. And he looks over the fence, and apparently it's such a humorous sight to see these women in their own female space really becoming enthusiastic about playing baseball, and he starts laughing at them. He thinks it's a comical sight, and then they realize that they're being watched, and they run off inside. And so apparently that's the last we ever heard of them. But one of the interesting things about that is that the article is not just sort of making light of the situation, but it's also complaining that women's rights have gone too far. Not only are they involved in public life and so on, but they're also playing baseball, which these people hadn't really paid any attention to until 2 years previously. But now all of a sudden it's the domain of real men, and only real men should be able to play baseball. But so we see that in a lot of these, just in these little articles, it gives a glimpse of what's going on. And of course, we never hear about this team again, so we don't really know how much of this is real, how much of this is sort of fanciful, and what the details are. And it's at this point lost to history. And I'm just hoping somewhere out there that we find sort of corroborating evidence. Somebody wrote a letter, somebody left a diary, somebody did this, but so far no luck.
Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to come forward a little bit in time and going to move back to Knoxville with Mark Aubrey. So Mark, share us a story that everybody should know from Knoxville.
I wrote a brief biography of Frank Moffett, who spanned from the 1880s up to the 1930s. He was very active in baseball. So if you would indulge me while I read this out. Frank Hubert Moffett was born on March 15th, 1873, the fifth child of John T. Moffett and Sarah McDowell, coming from Irish and Scottish heritage. Though official records differ on whether he was born in Georgia or Tennessee, by 1880 he was living in Knoxville, where he would leave a lasting legacy. He attended the Hamden Sidney School on Gay Street in Knoxville in 1888. And that same year, he and his brother Charlie joined a local baseball club, the W.J. Ramages. By 1891, Frank had earned local reputation as a strong pitcher, even taking down a team from Cincinnati. That year, he also ventured onto the football field, playing in Knoxville's first organized game. Later, he captained a newly formed local football team called the Rushers, a sign of his early leadership and deep commitment to the sports in the region. Frank's journey as a baseball manager began in earnest in 1893 when he took the helm of the Knoxville Reds. Though faced with underperforming rosters and tepid fan support, Frank remained determined to bring quality baseball to Knoxville. Over the next several years, he juggled managing and promoting teams to keep the game alive in a town that struggled to fill the stands. In 1895, he relocated the team to the Asylum Street grounds, renaming it Baldwin Park in honor of a Southern Railway vice president who helped secure the field. Attendance saw a modest bump, but financial losses remained a recurring challenge. His passion, however, never wavered. Through the late 1890s and early 1900s, Frank bounced between teams and cities, from Union, South Carolina, to Rome, Georgia, to Anderson, South Carolina, managing independent clubs, forming short-lived leagues, and occasionally returning to Knoxville to field the team. No matter where he went, the story was similar: poor attendance, limited funds, and a relentless belief in the game's potential. In 1903, he became the first real head baseball coach at the University of Tennessee, where he began a long and successful collegiate coaching tenure. Under his guidance, the Vols improved steadily, posting impressive records, including a standout 16-3 season in 1908. His coaching record at UT, 94, 54-2, remains one of the most successful in their history. Even as Knoxville's professional baseball scene fluctuated, joining and leaving various leagues, changing team names from the Indians to the Appalachians to the Reds, Moffett was often at the center of it. In 1910, he led the Knoxville team to a Southeastern League championship. The following years saw many second-place finishes. The 19-teens had their own issues, though. The Appalachian League folded in mid-season in 1914. Knoxville had no team in 1915, and his father died in 1916. Still, he continued coaching the UT team, promoting wrestling matches, and managing local and amateur teams, including one in Alcoa that dominated the league. His resilience and innovation, combined with his deep love for the game, made him a cornerstone of early baseball in East Tennessee. Whether in front of a packed grandstand or a handful of faithful spectators, Moffitt kept the spirit of the sport alive, always believing in the next season, the next team, and the promise of a better crowd. By 1921, professional baseball had once again returned to Knoxville, and Moffitt found himself coaching the pioneers of the Appy League in 1922 through 24. He gathered 2 championships. He coached the Smokies in the South Atlantic League in 1926. After decades of shaping the baseball landscape in Knoxville and beyond, Frank Moffitt began winding down his long and varied career in the mid-20s. But even as he stepped back from the spotlight, his presence and influence on the game never truly faded. Along with managing and coaching teams, he was also a scout, sending several local players to the majors, including Bill Meyer, Nick Cullop, Tommy Bridges, Johnny Stone, and Dale Alexander. His last full-time position was coach at Lincoln Memorial University in the spring of 1935. Frank Moffitt died on October 19, 1935 at the age of 62. He was laid to rest in Knoxville's Old Gray Cemetery, just blocks away from where he played and coached on dusty infields and improvised ballparks nearly a half-century earlier. Though he never became a household name on the national stage, Moffitt was a pioneer in Southern baseball, a relentless promoter, a savvy manager, and a coach with an eye for both talent and tactics. In an era when baseball in the South often struggled for stability and legitimacy, Frank Moffitt helped give it both. The Knoxville Journal sports writer Marvin Thompson, in a eulogy of Moffitt on the day after he passed, said, "And when you think of the finer things of baseball, you think of Colonel Frank Moffitt. They are synonymous."
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate that. And if you get a chance to visit Mark's website, he really rounds out the story, and there's a lot more detail to Frank Moffitt and his role in Knoxville baseball, so really appreciate that. We'll now jump back to Suspect Middle Tennessee and some Sulphur-Dell stories with Skip Nipper.
There are... You're going the wrong way. I'm going the wrong way. Okay, I'm usually going the wrong way. There are 3 things you need to play a baseball game. Can you name them? A bat, I heard a bat. A ball? Field. There you go. I knew somebody was going to say a glove. And if you ask an 1864 modified rules baseball player, you'd learn that there are no gloves. You have to have a field to play on, and Nashville had plenty of fields to play on. In fact, one of them was in 1866 when the Cumberland Baseball Club played the Louisvilles in a game at Fort Gillem. Now, Fort Gillem was a fort during the Civil War, along with Fort Negley. Herschel Greer Stadium was built for the Nashville Sounds in 1977 to begin play in 1978 at the foot of Fort Negley. Then we jump ahead to go back to 1866, and the Cumberlands and the Louisvilles played at Fort Gillem, and Fort Gillem is the site of Fisk Jubilee Hall. They moved the field over when they built Fisk Jubilee Hall, so there's that connection to Nashville baseball. But Nashville's main ballpark was at the foot of the state capitol and what is now Bicentennial Mall. Between Jefferson Street and back towards town, there's a railroad yard that goes back that way also. It was called Athletic Park, lovingly. Grantland Rice, the dean of American sports writers, took a job with the Tennessean. He'd gone to Vanderbilt where he played baseball. He'd been captain of the baseball team. And he did a little contest with a couple of other newspapers where folks could write in to name not only the ballpark, because it was just Athletic Park, and not much poetic rhyme there. And the ball club was called the Nashville Baseball Club and usually referred to in the papers by the name of the manager. In 1901, 1902, 1903, Newt Fisher was the manager. The newspaper said the Nashville Fisherman. So Grantland Rice felt like we needed a name, so he liked to write in rhyme, in poetic terms, and Fred Russell, who later was a sports writer, protege of Grant and Rice in Nashville, said lovingly, I think, that Grant and Rice, as he wrote, couldn't think of anything to rhyme with Sulphur Spring Bottom, which is the area which Athletic Park was in. So if you try to rhyme bottom with something, you'll have a hard time too. So he came up with this term called Sulphur Dell Spring. And that's where, because there was a sulfur spring in the area, a natural sulfur spring. It's been capped off, but you can still smell it if you go to a Nashville Sounds game if you get out in the right spot. And so the name stuck, Sulphur Dell, lovingly once again. He ran a contest to name the Nashville baseball team. There were 3 names that he proposed. The Lime Rocks. If you've been to Middle Tennessee and tried to dig a hole, there's lots of lime rock. Second one was Rocks, shortened from Lime Rocks. Now that would have been a great name for a Nashville baseball team today because Nashville rocks, y'all, I'm gonna tell you. But the third one was Volunteers, and that's because the ballpark set it within view of the state capitol. After the 1926 season, the ball club was sold. In those days prior, the setting sun, remember there are no lights and games were played in the afternoon, so the setting sun as it set over the capitol was in the batter's eyes. And the new owners thought that they could do something a little different. They turned the ballpark completely around, built a steel and concrete structure to hold 7,500. Now that didn't help the center fielder out now because the sun is in his eyes. But Sulphur Dell changed. Fred Russell wrote for several years from the press box up above home plate, he could still see the base pass of the old ballpark. So here we have Sulphur Dell. This is 1932 on opening day. There were over 14,000. It's still the largest crowd ever to attend a ball game at Sulphur Dell. And I need to go backwards again, don't I? And you can see it's an unusual contour because people are seated not flat in the outfield hills. They didn't have any place to put them. So they put them in the outfield hills. It's a little bit more pronounced in right field, which you will see in just a second, but it gave an unusual sorry, but a lot of the ball players call it Sulphur Hell because it was an unusual place to have to play the outfield. Whoops. And this is a bird's eye view of Sulphur Dell. This is compliments of the Metro Archives, who are wonderful, just like here. You can ask and you'll probably get an answer. And this is a picture of the Baltimore Elite Giants. They began as the Nashville Elite Giants in the Negro Southern League in 1920, known as the White Sox. Tom Wilson, who is, I think, the father of Negro Leagues baseball in Nashville. Without him, there would have been no Negro Leagues baseball in Nashville. He moved the club around several places. He actually built his own park called Tom Wilson Park, which is out by the Nashville Fairgrounds. And this is spring training, and you can see how that hill gave it that unusual contour. This is the last game ever played at Sulphur Dell. It's in 1963 in September. There were only 700 or so people there. It ended after no baseball in 62 because the Southern Association, after 60 years, went out of business the prior season. And there was no pro ball, but they came back as a South Atlantic team in 1963. And this was the last game. People weren't going. They now had air conditioning. They now had 2 cars in their family. Little League Baseball was gaining strength, and I Love Lucy was on. I think those things have a lot to do with it. And this is that right field hill. And the right fielder would usually carve out what they call the porch. He would carve out an area because if you're standing in a hill, now get this, if he's standing at the base of that fence, his feet are 22.5 feet above the playing surface. So where do you play? Do you play at the top? Do you play at the bottom and run up? There's a story, Smead Jolly was playing right field for Nashville one time, playing right field, didn't know where to play. They hit a ball real hard up the hill that went between his legs. And when he turned to get it, it hit the fence and came back to him, went forward between his legs again. And when he got to the bottom of the hill, the runner was going to third, and he threw the ball over the third baseman's head. He got 3 errors on 1 play. This is 1962 when there was no professional baseball. This is Goose Tatum on the left, and you probably recognize that fellow. Do you recognize that fellow? Right? Satchel Paige. The Harlem Stars came to Nashville and played exhibition, or what we call barnstorming games. And this one is another one from the press box, way up high. I never did find a picture that showed me those old base paths from the other direction, Where it says VOLS there, that's where the entrance to the new ballpark is today for the Nashville Sounds. And sadly, I can't think of his name, he was a country music star, and Eddie Page, who was one of the administrators of the Nashville Speedway, got together and decided to build a speedway there in 1965. It lasted 13 weekends, but they kept canceling games. Finally went up for sale in 1965. Sad day. This is a marker that's not too far away from where Tom Wilson built his ballpark. Tom Wilson would allow anybody to play there. He had it there 5 or 6 years before he tore it down and built the Paradise Ballroom for the black community. It's in Trimble Bottom, like I say, not far from the fairgrounds. If you had a wedding, if your family had a wedding and you needed a place to have the wedding, he would rent it to you. If you wanted to have a church outing, he rented it to you. He cared not what your skin color was. That was not reciprocated necessarily in Nashville. And this marker for Sulphur Dell was taken down when they started working on the ballpark for the Nashville Sounds about 2013, 2014. It opened in 2015. Skater Jeff Wells and I've talked about that. It's gone. It's missing. We don't know where it is. Probably in somebody's den, not mine. And there is a marker in the new ballpark, in the ground, in the concrete there on the apron. This is the marker there that is the approximate location of the home plate at Sulphur Dell from 1927 until they tore it down. Actually, in 1969, there was not much else going on. Got a lot of Vols pictures. Those are great.
Thank you, Skip, for sharing that. So now we have some sort of open-ended questions for our panel, just to get their different responses, and feel free to jump in, whoever wants to go first. So the first prompt, share something that has been surprising to you that you've learned in your research, or even challenged what you thought you already knew about the game.
Is that wide open?
Yep.
Let's see if I can get back to this one thing that I found most interesting in my research was, let's see. There we go. Finding ball fields. One of the things about what was in print of Knoxville was there was the Gay Street grounds, which is on the 300 block of Gay Street today. Well, that was the Knoxville and Knoxville's home ground, but where were the Holstons? And being a Holston on Adam's team I was eager to find it. And so I just kept digging and searching, and databases are getting so much better. Newspapers.com is a wonderful source for so much of our research. And then one day, I don't know if I hit Origins, baseball, something popped, and I got this article on the left there from 1895, and it was an origin story which had never been, as far as I know, no one had ever seen before. And what was interesting is it matched up with the origin story from the founding father of baseball in Knoxville, Samuel Billings Dow. He did an interview as an 82-year-old man, I believe, in 1921 for the Knoxville Sentinel. And there's some issues with his memory after 50-something years trying to remember, but a lot of the things lined up. And one of the interesting things was he answered, in there he said the Holston boys had to get their own grounds. And he talked about how they cleared the ground on Gay Street. But he said those boys went down to the area today now known as Cripple Creek. And thanks to some wonderful research being done by folks like Bob Booker, the Knoxville History Project, Jack Neely and his group, on the Cripple Creek community, I found out, well, this is where First Creek was. This is where at that time they were calling it Cripple Creek, was the African-American community along First Creek. And I thought, wow, let me look at some maps. Can't find any photos from the period. I found a photo from 1873. Where along First Creek might they have played? Looked at the 1867 map. That's what's shown up there. The blue ball shows where the Knoxville and Knoxville's played. But the one up here along First Creek, Cripple Creek, is where the Holstons is where I believe they played. Using this map from 1867, the original, it's from Cincinnati, I believe the original is up on the 3rd floor of McClung, and then McClung Historical Collection. There's this open ground in 1867 around the railroads. And in 1873 photo, which is taken on the west side, looking back to the east, you see Gay Street, you see the railroad, and you see this section of land, which was still largely vacant. I believe that is where the Holstons played, and you all know what is sitting on that ground today. That is Mr. Boyd's Knoxville Smokies. And I just think that's so awesome that baseball has kind of come full circle in Knoxville from one of the earliest teams. And that's just one of those probably 1 a.m. discoveries that we have in the middle of the night while we're going down the rabbit hole.
Sure. Any other cool finds or?
Yeah. It's slightly disturbing, but it's history. In 1909, in the Knoxville newspaper, all white fans who wish to see the game are invited to attend, and arrangements will be made to care for them at the park. This was at a colored baseball game. 1955, some 46 years later, still, a section of the grandstand and box seats will be reserved for white fans. There was racial divide, but we had African Americans playing baseball, as Doc said, 3 different teams in 1867, they're named. Throughout the 80s and 90s and into the early 1900s, there were black baseball teams. In 1920, the Negro Southern League came to be, along with the Negro National League. Knoxville, it was the Knoxville Giants. In my mind, they won the championship. It was awarded to Montgomery, hinky dinky, not cool President Perdue, but they went on to play the Chicago American Giants in a series of games called the Colored World Series. Why did it take so long for us to come together? I don't know. So that was surprising to me that it lasted so long. Also in 1953, Knoxville was integrated in baseball. The Tuggerson brothers were playing for the Smokies in the Mountain States League out at Chapman Highway Park as Smithson Stadium was being rebuilt into Municipal Stadium. So they were doing it on the field, they just weren't doing it in the stands. That's a head scratcher for me.
There's some interesting stories about how, obviously, I've done the 1860s, y'all have done beyond that period, but where there are African American teams, there are moments where, for the Gay Street grounds, the McClung family owned that property, especially in the 400 and 300 block of Gay Street, where they would play baseball. But when those African American clubs would look for a baseball field, they asked the McClungs if they could play. The McClungs didn't mind. It was a dump, is what it was. It was the last section of Gay Street that had yet to be developed. And the Knoxville, when they formed their team, they helped clean it up. They actually prepared the ground for what was happening in the 1870s when Knoxville hit a boom, and then they built these big 3-5-story brick warehouses to finish up the business district of Gay Street. But they do allow African Americans to play on that ground, but there is no racial integration. In 1867, the baseball fever, as Chris mentioned, it catches on, and they have a Knoxville baseball championship. And there's all these teams that are supposed to be coming in, but there's some inclement weather, and a lot of teams cancel. And the last second, the African American team say, "We would like to join and play in your all's championship," and they were not allowed to play. So there's some instances where there's some allowed to play on what are the baseball grounds, but no, never able to be racially integrated. That doesn't mean the game wasn't racially integrated in some places. Frederick Douglass, the great African-American orator, his son played on a racially integrated baseball team in Rochester, New York. So but that's up in New York. So there's some interesting side bits that in my research I've dived into. But I want to say one more thing that Chris brought up. And again, you got to cut me off because I will talk.
I'm about to.
Yes. Chris mentioned early on about athletic, how it was important. There's one thing he did not mention, but it was also morally, spiritually. That was a key component to it, that those boys need to get out there, not just for their physical activity, but for, their morals. And that goes in with the gentleman game. No cussing, no spitting, none of this kind of stuff going on. But it was very important. So that was a Christianity aspect was an important aspect of building baseball and promoting it. On the other side, William Parson Brownlow here, the good Methodist minister, he got a little upset about players who wanted to get together and play on Sundays. wanted to play on holidays like Thanksgiving.
That's,
So-
yeah, so there are a couple points. One is that we do in Nashville have a instance of a black team called the Excelsiors, who in 1866 and 1868 challenged the white clubs, especially the Phoenix Club in 1868, to a match, and they were never taken up. And it's interesting to me, and one of the things that's sort of surprising to me is I knew nothing about politics of Tennessee in 1860s or of Nashville, and it's inescapable when you do this kind of research that that you have to kind of figure out what's going on socially and culturally. I mentioned Parson Brownlow. There's a sort of a both disturbing and sort of wonderful report in 1866 of several black men who were fined for playing baseball in the Sulphur Spring Bottom on Sunday, and they were hauled into court, and the newspapers had a wonderful day of it, and they were dubbed in the newspapers Brownlow's Black Boys Baseball Club. And so my first question was, who's Brownlow? And of course I learned Brownlow was governor at the time, and he was seen to be a proponent of civil rights, and there was all this politics going on, and so I mean that was one of the surprising things to me. And one of the founders I mentioned, the Rock City Club, Edward Metcalf, was a northern transplant, but he was also a radical Republican who was himself in favor of equal rights for black Tennesseans, and so researching him, I had to learn about what was he doing, and so it is just inescapable, and that was so that's an education in itself.
And politics is a key dividing factor in early Knoxville's history. Often it's told that the teams were set up by their Unionists, Union soldiers, and then Confederate soldiers. I found in the research, it's actually politics. It's post-war politics. The Knoxvilles, the first team to form, were the Republicans. These were Republicans that stayed true to Lincoln. They accepted, they wanted the preservation of the Union, and they accepted emancipation. I'm not going to say they're diehard radical Republicans, proponent of racial integration, but the other side were clearly were of a Southern mindset. They were pro-Confederate. However, there were Unionists who broke on Lincoln on emancipation and became Democrats in the post-war period. So that's one of the parts where I blend in my history into political history, constitutional history, in with my research, where politics actually sets up the division in the first two teams in Knoxville.
So I'm going to sort of ask a odd question for a panel of historians. We spend a lot of time looking backwards. From your vantage point, knowing the history of baseball in our communities, where do you think baseball is going? What's next?
You mean the game?
Yeah.
What's going on now, I'm not the demographic for. I think we have become a visual society. We're less interested in you can't study history until it's past. And I just think that I'm wondering who in 20 years is going to study the Knoxville Smokies of 2025, because where are they going to look? The newspapers no longer cover details of the game, the players, the fans, the ballpark. I mean, I know it's different a little bit here in Knoxville, but it sure has changed in Nashville, where the newspapers don't report the score. If they did, it'd be 2 days late anyway. But I think that's the biggest peril, I think, of baseball. It's all about the graphics. If you watched any of the All-Star game last night, the best part was the Henry Aaron tribute. But after that, it was all about social media, my 10 seconds of fame. I'm not being critical of it, because we enjoy it, that kind of a thing. So.
Good response. Any others? If not, we'll save some time for questions from the audience. Go ahead.
The Silverdale ballpark, with the fence up on top of the hill, was the home run over the fence?
The fence was 16 feet tall, and then they put a 30-foot screen on top of it, because I didn't show it, I don't think, in any of these pictures. Down the left field line was 334. Center field was 421. Those are pretty normal. Of course, you had those hills to deal with. But it was a pronounced hill, 22 and a half feet above the playing surface at the bottom of the wall. but the distance from home plate to the wall was 262 feet. So the managers, if he was smart, would load up his team with left-handed hitters. However, they would have to have that Sulphurdale stroke. There was a man named Bob Lennon in 1954, hit 64 home runs. I think 42 were hit Sulphurdale. Left-handed batter, called up to the majors. I think he had 7 the rest of his career because he's hitting like this. He's hitting like this to get it over that fence.
So the game with all the people on the hill up there, that could have been a Steve Barton before Steve Barton.
Well, there are some reports that before they decided what the ground rules were going to be, that if an opposing player hit a ball in the stands, in the field where the fans are sitting, the fans were tossing the ball around so he couldn't get it to throw somebody out.
Appreciate that question. Thank you.
Baseball wasn't desegregated in the North when it came south. When was baseball desegregated? Was it Jackie Robinson?
Moses
What
Fleetwood,
city, what club, what?
Moses Fleetwood Walker of the Toledo Blue Stockings in about 1887, something like that.
Mid-80s, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's also another one, and I can't recall. He's just been named to the Hall of Fame, and I can't think of his name.
Because I know, but up north, I grew up with Homestead Grays and the Negro League up there, but they were segregated.
Sure.
And down here, it didn't surprise me at all when I moved here and learned what I learned here.
Right.
There are about, I think, 5 or 6 individuals in unique clubs. It could have been a collegiate club. We see photos of that, or in a amateur or semi-professional club, but it wasn't widespread.
Okay.
I guess you'd have to define, are we talking modern professional baseball? Like the era I do is amateur, where baseball is spelled with 2 words. And I'm talking, there's integrated baseball going on up in Rochester, New York, before the American Civil War begins. But if you're talking professional baseball, I would lean on these gentlemen. I'm just masquerading as a baseball historian today.
And even Moses Fleetwood Walker could not play in every game because some cities will not allow him to, but the Blue Stockings were a member, I think, of the American Association, which it is considered one of those professional ball clubs.
Okay. So it was desegregated then.
And it was resegregated, yeah. Because of that, it became resegregated, and I think
That's
Cap
right.
Anson was one of the leaders of,
That's right.
of that, where the leagues decided that there was they had these votes, and most of the teams voting would vote for the league to remain whites only.
I think going through the exhibit and listening to you all, there's almost like an endless amount of history for Tennessee baseball. But still, I think there's maybe a population that might say, oh, well, and I asked this to Adam yesterday, well, there's no major league team, there can't be that much history. How would you respond to that?
Skip, you want to go?
Well, I think there were 29 cities in Tennessee that played minor league ball. We haven't covered those yet. So somebody will, I think, over a period of time. Some of them are obviously defunct teams that didn't last very long. But I disagree. I think as long as people like you folks are interested to come and hear, I think it can be more widespread than that. I think the main thing is it should be taught in the schools. I can't think of the man's name, but Lawrence Ritter, in glory of their times, quotes him as saying, if you want to learn about baseball, if you want to learn about America, you need to learn about baseball. And if you think about the expansion of America, even to the West, baseball went with them. One of the founders of baseball is considered, I can't think of his name once again, went to Hawaii and taught the Hawaiians how to play baseball. So if you take it under those terms, it's widespread.
Dean, please.
I would just like to add to what Skip's saying. Last time I checked, there's over 1,000 Tennesseans who have gone into the major league to play that.
Yeah.
They had to learn somewhere.
Yeah.
That's part of their story, part of the major league story.
Yeah, appreciate that, Dean. Henry.
Oh, yeah, I'm just fascinated with the sociological and cultural aspects of baseball, especially contrasted with football and basketball. maybe I'm being sort of idealistic, but it seems to have roots in sort of community building, more so than more contemporary sports have. And I'm not sure what's the cause and effect there. Any of y'all looked into that? What is it about baseball that promotes communities in small areas forming local club teams that's distinct from other sports? I mean, there's a whole lot of little community baseball teams you find out in neighborhoods like Riverdale, where I grew up, and things like that. What is it about baseball? What's cause and effect there?
That's a good question. I've been wondering that myself, looking at post-war, post-Civil War baseball, because I look at the Nashville clubs, and by 1867, just a year or two after baseball was founded, all of a sudden there is this push to have, we need a champion Nashville club to vie for the state championship, and the same goes around the state, and I don't know the answer to that. Part of me thinks that it has to do with post-war economics, but at the same time, it's happening everywhere. So, I mean, that's a great question. My response is, I wish I knew.
Wouldn't it be kind of easier for the masses to play a baseball game than it'd be to suit up to play a football game and all that other? I remember as a kid we'd play, sandlot baseball, but not so much football and basketball because you have to have a court.
Part of it is the community you're in. If you look back 100 years ago, the Knoxville News Sentinel sponsored tons of leagues. You had, the Railroad League, you had the Sunday School League, you had the this league, that league, various athletic organizations, YMCA, the Young Men's Jewish Association, were playing in leagues. They were reported on. Sometimes it was above the national scores. You wanted to see how your kid was doing, how little Tommy was doing. There was a pride there, and it fostered. And then as the young men grew, then you had more of the adult leagues.
Well, I grew up in South Knoxville, and there were probably 10 little league teams, out there.
Sure.
And the guys I was talking with the other day, we were wondering if there's any little league teams in Knoxville at all now. You just don't hear about it.
Plugging ahead, Amber Rosner is going to be speaking more on this topic in a couple weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get to that thought, we're just going to wrap up with one very quick question for each of you, and we'll just go down the line. Finish this sentence for me. The perfect day at the ballpark is?
Watching the game and not watching the entertainment.
Thought.
Setting in a much more relaxing, not this fast-paced sport as the others, and being able to talk to the people around you and get to know, and there's some community building there, you get to meet new friends. As opposed to other sports where it's just loud when you're in a basketball stadium or something.
Memories created. I've got photos and just memories of going with family. 3 generations together at once, talking, laughing, having the Sunday in a helmet.
Good answer. Chris?
Any day at the ballpark is at the ballpark for me. It doesn't matter. I've got my hot dog, my scorecard, and the people around, eavesdropping on the people around me, and that's great.
How about a round of applause for our panelists? And as Dr. Doctor referenced at the beginning, just wanted to make you aware of a couple of upcoming lectures. So on August 13th, Katatra Vasquez will be with us to talk about the legacy of the Oak Ridge Bombers, a Negro League team here in the context of the Manhattan Project. And then the other talk that was referenced is Dr. Amber Rosner will be with us on August 20th to talk about building community through local baseball coverage. She's going to look at the role that the media and newspapers played in creating local identity and community identity through those reports. So those will be 2 great lectures to round out this series in our examination of baseball history. So again, please be our guest today. Head back to the baseball exhibit and enjoy your afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you at the ballpark at some point this summer.